Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got a very special show for you today because I am joined by author and former Democratic presidential candidate Marianne Williamson, a longtime guest on our show, now gonna try out guest hosting.
Yeah, I'm in a whole different position. I get to be the inquisitor.
Isn't that fun?
Yeah, it is fun, and thank you for having me. Great.
It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you. What's on your radar this morning?
Happy to share with you, Marianne. Well, White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt hosted her first press briefing yesterday at just 27 years of age. She's the youngest press secretary in history, and conservatives were thrilled with her performance. With an impressive command of the facts and a praiseworthy ability to recall details from memory without consulting a binder of notes, she was able to shut down mainstream media talking points over and over again yesterday. But the biggest challenge to the mainstream media reporters in the room was that they could soon have serious competition. That's because Levitt announced she was restoring the press passes of 440 journalists whose ability to attend the briefings was revoked by the Biden administration. She's also inviting podcasters, bloggers, social media influencers, and everybody who falls under the umbrella of alternative media content creators to apply for White House press credentials for the first time. Let's listen to that announcement.
This White House believes strongly in the First Amendment, so it's why our team will work diligently to restore the press passes of the 440 journalists whose passes were wrongly revoked by the previous administration. We're also opening up this briefing room to new media voices who produce news-related content and whose outlet is not already represented by one of the seats in this room. We welcome independent journalists, podcasters, social media influencers, and content creators to apply for credentials to cover this White House. And you can apply now on our new website, whitehouse.gov/newmedia. Starting today, this seat in the front of the room, which is usually occupied by the press secretary's staff, will be called the new media seat. My team will review the applications and give credentials to new media applicants who meet our criteria and pass United States Secret Service requirements to enter the White House complex. So in light of these announcements, our first questions for today's briefing will go to these new media members whose outlets, despite being some of the most viewed news websites in the country, have not been given seats in this room.
True to her word, those first two questions went to Axios, a new media venture with a liberal bent, and Breitbart News, a massive conservative online news website. Now, Levitt's announcement is a game changer and a sign that the mainstream media will no longer be able to use their gatekeeping power to constrain the range of acceptable commentary and questioning that takes place in that briefing room. I can't say it any better than former Rising host Saagar Enjeti, who correctly rails against the White House Correspondents Association as, quote, a cartel of largely failing MSM outlets who use legacy rules to gatekeep and force out competition. Literally, their last gasp of relevance is in White House coverage, and if you bypass them from the jump, it will accelerate the decline. Indeed, that cartel, the White House Correspondents Association, gets to determine the seating chart in the briefing room, and thus has all sorts of power to direct, steer, even control the narrative within the room. Challenging its authority means challenging the authority of the failing legacy media's authority, and that's a good thing. It's also a good thing that this White House recognizes the importance of alternative media and in alternative media platforms like YouTube, which you're watching right now perhaps, Spotify, Instagram, even TikTok. Something Democrats are now associated with trying to ban, Trump is associated with saving. Indeed, if you want to understand why the right is suddenly succeeding with young people, why Donald Trump, of all people, improved the GOP's image among the under 30 crowd, look no further than MAGA's wholesale embrace of podcasters and social media influencers. Democrats need to up their game if they want to compete, because right now, young people see the Democrats as the party of older people, the party of the people who follow rules, who trust experts, who think legacy sources of information are A-OK, who are wildly in favor of the national security establishment, the mainstream media, the higher education system, world government, mass migration, and so on. It's a coalition of, to use a term that's popular with the very young, very online right now, NPCs, i.e. non-playable characters. Some of you probably know this term from gaming, if you're like me. MAGA, on the other hand, has wholeheartedly embraced outsiders with heterodox and controversial views, people who aren't afraid to share these opinions loudly and at great length all over social media. I don't always agree with them. They don't always agree with each other. There's tremendous variety and differences between someone like Joe Rogan, a superstar in this environment, former supporter of Bernie Sanders, by the way, and a Gen Z MAGA influencer on TikTok. Now look, there will always be a place for traditional media in the White House press briefing room. But by throwing open the doors to the kind of people who are thriving in this new media ecosystem, who are watched, read, and listened to by millions and millions and millions of Americans, far more Americans, frankly, than are still paying attention to legacy media, the Trump administration has demonstrated that it is getting with the times. As ex-CEO Linda Yaccarino put it, by allowing bloggers, social media influencers, and podcasters into the Brady briefing room, Karoline Leavitt is confirming what we already know. The world has changed. You are the media now. So this was a big announcement, something independent-minded people who are content creators or journalists on different platforms are really excited about. And I think it is a good thing and something people of a variety of ideological stripes can celebrate, having more access to this very legacy kind of media space for people who think a little differently.
Well, I agree with that, and I agree with Sagar's comments about the legacy media. The problem with the legacy media is that it has surrendered so much of its moral authority. It is so profit-driven, and it is so aligned with the idea that there's a particular kind of establishment viewpoint that they see themselves as the entitled protectors of. Opening that up is good. The problem I have is when Karoline Leavitt says, "Send me your form, and I will decide who gets to come in."
I mean, somebody's got to decide. There's a finite amount of space in the room.
Yes, but we already see with what's happening with Phil McGraw and so forth. This White House is very focused on its own propaganda. It's very focused on its own messaging. So we'll see if we find out that all this alternative media is. I mean, look, he's president, so he has a right to his agenda and his bias to some extent. But if we find out that all that he's letting in, like 90% or 80%, even 70%, is these right-wing spaces, as opposed to really allowing in other viewpoints, then that's going to be a problem, and there'll be pushback for that.
Do you think the Democrats have squandered a lot of just kind of automatic goodwill that liberals had among young people? I think back to my own childhood. Like, it was cool to be liberal. It was you're rebelling against the authority figures that are Republicans in the late 90s, especially during the early aughts when patriotic fervor for Bush type stuff was really popular, and that young people were resisting that by being liberal. Now it feels like the shoe is on the other foot. You resist by becoming pro-Trump.
Well, I don't think you resist by becoming pro-Trump. I think that's strange thinking. However, what you said about the Democratic Party is absolutely correct. I experienced that as a candidate. I experience it now running for DNC chair. There is this establishment within the Democratic Party that sometimes I feel like it's intent on shrinking its own base. We need to open our doors in the Democratic Party to the different voices within our party. You saw this, of course, with Kamala Harris bringing in Liz Cheney, a Republican, going after this kind of mythical center. So the Democratic Party, in this and in many ways, I'm afraid, sort of created a big hole that Donald Trump walked into. But there are many reformers within the Democratic Party trying to change this, and we need to change it quickly, and we're sort of being forced to. I just hope that some of that establishment of the Democratic Party will admit to itself the abject failure that their perspective has brought us to, step aside, let some new voices in, and then we'll be fine, and then we'll be right up there with you guys, and we'll win in 26.
You mentioned Dr. Phil, who did go on this immigration raid. We actually have an interview with him. Marianne asked him some tough questions. That's coming up next. You won't want to miss it. Stay tuned for more Rising.